He lost his wife, and he lost himself. The man who once laughed now came home to silence, bitter, cold, empty, until one night. He heard something, a voice, a song, a sound he hadn't heard since the day she died. He followed it, confused, shaken, and when he opened that door, he fell to his knees, because the song only his wife used to sing was being sung by someone else. And in that moment, he knew. God hadn't left. He had just been waiting. The house had been silent for months, not quiet, empty. The boys cried. He ignored. And the man who once prayed stopped believing, until Teresa arrived. She wasn't hired to heal. She was just the maid. But that night, she sat on the floor, guitar in hand, and sang the one song no one had dared to touch, not to replace, but to restore. And in a house full of grief, God began to sing again. Before we begin, pause, breathe, let your heart listen. If you've ever grieved, if you've ever wondered where God was in the silence, this story is for you. Click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where you're watching from. Because sometimes God doesn't shout, He whispers through lullabies. Now let's go back to the night the music returned. It was a Monday evening, gray skies over Seattle, the kind of quiet rain that made the city feel slower, colder, and inside the Wright estate, the silence was heavier than the weather outside. Andrew Wright stepped through the front door with nothing but keys in one hand and an ache in the other. He didn't speak, didn't ask about the boys, didn't look toward the living room. He hadn't looked in a long time. He just tossed his coat on the chair like a man returning to a place he didn't want to call home. The air was still. No running feet, no shouts, no crying. He was used to that now. The twins didn't run to greet him anymore. He had been gone too many nights, missed too many bedtimes, and now all that was left between them was distance. He loosened his tie, exhaled sharply, and started down the hallway toward his office. Then he stopped. There was a sound, barely audible, faint, fragile. Music, a melody, a voice, soft, slow, and warm like something half-remembered in a dream. His eyebrows pulled together. He stood still, listening. He thought, no, it couldn't be. But it was. A lullaby. Her lullaby. The one Alyssa used to hum when the house was filled with love. When the boys still believed Mommy would always be there. When life was still whole. He froze, his hand resting on the wall. For a moment, he couldn't move. His mind told him it was impossible. His heart didn't care. He followed it, one step, then another, each one slower than the last. The music grew clearer, not from a speaker, not a recording. No, it was live, present, real. His breath caught in his throat as he reached the living room door. It was slightly open, just enough. He pushed gently, and what he saw brought him to his knees. Teresa, the maid, the quiet woman who barely spoke, was sitting cross-legged on the rug. A guitar rested in her lap, worn and simple. Her voice floated through the air like a prayer, and on either side of her, his sons, Brian and Jason, asleep, one against her leg, the other curled near her hip, peaceful, still, breathing with ease. They hadn't slept like that in months. The song continued, unhurried, sacred. Andrew stared, unmoving, unbelieving. He hadn't heard that song since the hospital. No one in this house dared to touch it. He had forbidden it. Even the sound of it on the radio had made him leave the room. But now, here it was, sung not in defiance, but in care, in gentleness, in something holy. He felt his knees weaken. The doorframe caught him as he lowered himself slowly, silently, until he sat there, just watching. Teresa hadn't seen him. Her eyes were half closed, her brows gently drawn, like someone not performing, but worshipping. Every note came from a place he didn't understand, but somehow, his soul did. The boys stirred slightly, adjusting against her, but never woke. And Andrew, for the first time in months, felt something crack open inside his chest. Not pain, not anger, something deeper, something quieter. The song came to an end. The final note lingered, and in its silence, something in the house shifted. Teresa looked up, finally seeing him. She didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't rise. She simply held his gaze. "I found the words in her journal," she said softly. "The tune came from my grandmother. I didn't mean to overstep." Andrew couldn't speak. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled against his knees. His heart pounded like a drum in a cathedral. He wanted to ask why, how, who gave her the right, but none of it came out. Instead, he looked at his boys, still sleeping, still breathing, still here. He reached for the blanket folded over the arm of the couch, gently pulled it over their small shoulders, then stood. He didn't say thank you, didn't scold her, didn't cry. He just stood for a moment longer, looking, listening, then walked out of the room, leaving the door open behind him. The next morning, the Wright house was unusually quiet, but not the same silence as before. This one felt softer, like something had shifted just slightly in the walls. Andrew stood at the kitchen doorway, still in his button shirt, holding 2 mugs of coffee, one in each hand. He didn't even know why he poured the second one. Teresa stood barefoot at the stove. The twins were perched on stools beside her, tiny aprons knotted awkwardly around their backs. They were mixing pancake batter, badly. Flour covered the counter. Jason had chocolate chips stuck to his cheek. Brian was humming softly under his breath, the same tune from last night. Andrew watched them without speaking. He didn't want to interrupt. He didn't know how to step into this kind of peace. It felt borrowed, like a room someone else had cleaned. Teresa turned and saw him. She didn't flinch, just gave a quiet nod, almost like a good morning, without the words. Andrew walked in slowly and offered her the second mug. His hand was awkward, unsure. "I figured you might need this," he said. His voice was dry, like it hadn't been used in a while. She accepted it. Still no smile, just a gentle, "Thank you." They stood there for a moment, the boys giggling behind them, flicking batter toward each other when they thought no one was watching. "I heard the song," Andrew said quietly, eyes on the stove. Teresa didn't answer right away. "I wasn't trying to replace her," she said finally. "That song, it didn't feel like mine. It felt like something waiting to be heard again." Andrew nodded slowly. He didn't know what to say to that. He didn't trust his words anymore, laughing, alive. His heart pulled in 2 directions. He had no idea how to stand in this kitchen anymore, but leaving didn't feel right either. Teresa turned back to the pancakes. "They don't need fixing," she said gently, flipping one. "They just need to feel held." That line sat in the air like scripture. He let it settle. The timer on the stove beeped once. The twins jumped. "Pancakes are done," she said, pulling the pan off the heat. Brian hopped off his stool. "Can we eat in the garden?" "The garden?" Andrew asked, surprised. "They call it wind listening time," Teresa said, half a shrug in her voice. "Just sitting out there. No toys, no talking, just breathing." Andrew glanced toward the glass doors that led to the backyard. He hadn't set foot in the garden since the funeral. Alyssa had loved that place. Used to say the wind had secrets. Used to sit with her journal under the chameleon tree. The thought of it made something in his chest twist. He cleared his throat. I'll join you in a bit." Teresa looked at him, steady and quiet. She didn't press. She just nodded again. As the boys ran off with plates in their hands and socks sliding across the floor, Andrew leaned against the counter. His coffee had gone cold, but he kept holding the mug anyway. "They're different with you," he said. Teresa wiped the counter slowly. "I just listen," she said. "Sometimes grief is loud, but healing usually whispers." Her words weren't clever, they were honest, and somehow they cut deeper than anything else he'd heard in months. Outside, the boys' laughter echoed faintly through the glass. Andrew looked out, watched them tilt their heads to the sky like they were waiting for the wind to answer. And for the first time, he felt like maybe the house wasn't cursed with silence. Maybe it was slowly learning how to breathe again. Teresa turned toward the hallway, carrying a basket of folded laundry. She paused in the doorway. "I'm going to freshen their bedding. Let me know if you want breakfast warmed later." He nodded, then stopped her with a question he didn't plan to ask. "How did you know the melody?" She looked over her shoulder. "My grandmother used to hum it," she said. "When I read your wife's lyrics in the back of her journal, I recognized the rhythm. The rest just came." And then she walked away, leaving Andrew alone in the kitchen, with pancakes cooling, a heart he didn't know how to carry, and a song still echoing somewhere in the back of his mind. The rain came that night, not loud, just soft against the windows, steady, like breath. The kind of rain Alyssa used to say was made for remembering. Andrew sat at the desk in her old office, a place he hadn't touched since the funeral. Not even the cleaning staff went in there. Teresa never asked about it, and he never opened the door. Until now. The air smelled faintly of lavender and paper, like time had folded itself into the walls, like she was still near. He sat down slowly. The chair creaked under his weight. And there it was. Her journal. The one with the worn leather cover. The one she used to carry out to the garden every morning. The one he hadn't been able to look at since the day they lowered her into the ground. His hand hovered over it. Then he opened it, page after page, her handwriting. Delicate, intentional, full of life. She had written thoughts, prayers, drawings, little notes to the boys, grocery lists beside love letters, and near the back, he found it, the lullaby, written in soft pencil, unfinished, like she was still working on it. "To calm their fears when I can't be there," she had written in the margin. Andrew's throat tightened. He read it again. And again. The melody Teresa had sung last night. It was here, right here. He didn't know what hurt more, that it had been found, or that he hadn't gone looking for it himself. The next morning, the boys asked about the garden. "Can we go sit under Mommy's tree again?" Jason whispered, holding his stuffed bear by the arm. Teresa was standing nearby, folding tea towels. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Andrew knelt beside his son. He looked tired, but softer than usual. "I'll come with you," he said. Jason blinked, surprised. So did Brian. They walked outside together. Teresa stayed behind. The garden had changed, a little overgrown, a few weeds, but the chameleons were still blooming, still full of color, still exactly where she'd planted them. Andrew stood under the tree, looking up. "I haven't been out here since—" He didn't finish. The boys didn't ask him to. They sat on the grass, quiet, listening. And after a while, Brian asked the question Andrew had been afraid of. Why did Mommy stop singing? Andrew swallowed hard. He looked at the ground, then the sky, then back at his sons. "Because God needed her somewhere else," he said. Jason looked down at his bear. "But we still need her." Andrew's hands curled into fists in his lap. "I know," he whispered. "I know." He didn't have the words, so he didn't say any more. That evening, Teresa found him in the hallway, standing outside Alyssa's office again. This time the door was open. The light was on. He didn't move when she approached, just held the journal in his hand. "She wrote the song for them," he said, voice low, like confession, like regret. Teresa nodded. "I know," she replied. "She never finished it." Teresa looked at the pages. She finished what mattered. Andrew's eyes met hers. There was no blame in them, no pride, just stillness, and something like faith. "She didn't just sing it to calm them," Teresa said quietly. "She sang it to remind them of who they belonged to, who they still belong to." Andrew leaned against the doorframe. He looked tired, but not from work this time, from remembering. "I spent so long trying not to feel anything," he said. "And now I don't know how to hold all of it." Teresa didn't speak, just stood beside him in the silence. After a long moment, she asked, "Would you like me to keep singing it?" He didn't answer right away, but when he did, it came from somewhere honest. "I don't think I can ask you to stop." That night, as the house went still, Brian and Jason climbed into bed. No arguments, no tears, just two boys waiting to be held, waiting for the song. And as Teresa sat near the door, guitar in hand, Andrew stood just outside the room, listening, not as a man haunted, not as a stranger, but as a father, trying, still healing, still breaking, but breathing. The next morning, the house felt full in a way that made Andrew uneasy. Teresa moved through the kitchen with her usual calm. The boys played near the window, trying to guess the shapes in the clouds, but Andrew sat at the breakfast table with a knot in his chest. He couldn't name it, not yet. Only that something had shifted, and he didn't know how to hold it. Teresa caught his glance once, just a glance. It lingered a second longer than it should have. Not romantic, not even warm, just curious, cautious. She looked away first. Later that day, a photo appeared online. A local photographer, some mother at the park, had taken it without asking, posted it, tagged it. Andrew saw it on his phone, a notification buried between shareholder emails and news alerts. The picture was harmless at first glance. Teresa kneeling in the grass helping Jason tie his shoe, Brian mid-laugh beside her, sunlight over their shoulders like a painting. But the caption was loud. "Widowed billionaire hires young nanny," or something more. And the comments? God, the comments. Some praised, most questioned. Too many judged. About her skin, about her smile, about the way she touched the boys like she loved them. Andrew closed his phone. His hand trembled. Not from shame, but from the knowledge that this chaos was about to fall on someone who never asked for it. That evening, Teresa stayed later in the hallway. She usually sang, then left the room once the boys fell asleep. But tonight, she folded laundry nearby. Andrew passed her on the way to his office. They made eye contact. Briefly. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. She stood, finished folding the last shirt, and placed it gently in the basket. "I saw the photo," she said quietly. Not accusing, not afraid, just a statement. Andrew leaned against the wall, exhaling through his nose. "I didn't know it was out until it already was." Teresa nodded, folded her arms, not in defense, in stillness. "I've seen this happen before," she said. Andrew looked at her. "What do you mean?" "People talk," she replied, "especially when they see someone in a space they didn't expect." The silence stretched. She didn't explain, she didn't need to. Andrew looked down at his hands. "You didn't do anything wrong." Teresa didn't say thank you, didn't move closer, didn't soften. She just said, "That doesn't mean I won't pay for it." The next day, the twins were quieter. Jason held his bear tighter. Brian stayed close to Teresa's side, watching her with a quiet protectiveness Andrew hadn't noticed before. At lunch, Andrew tried to join them in the garden, but the boys didn't run to him. They didn't avoid him either. They just watched, like they were waiting to see what kind of father he would be today. He sat under the tree, beside them. "I liked your smile in the picture," Jason said softly. Andrew looked at him, surprised. Jason pointed at Teresa. "She was smiling," he said. "You weren't. You looked scared." Andrew didn't have a reply. Children have a way of seeing the truth, especially when adults work so hard to hide it. That night, after the boys were asleep, Andrew stood in the hallway again. He heard the guitar through the door, the song now familiar, no longer sacred and untouchable, but gently alive. Teresa stepped out just as he reached for the handle. They nearly bumped into each other. She steadied herself, didn't smile, didn't speak. "I'm sorry," Andrew said. She looked at him. "For what?" she asked. He hesitated. "For being too quiet," he said. "For not defending you louder." for letting you carry something that wasn't yours to carry." Her eyes softened, just barely. "I didn't need defending," she said. "I needed truth." Andrew nodded slowly. It's hard to know what's true when everything feels broken. Teresa stepped back, her voice almost a whisper. That's usually when God speaks the clearest. And then she turned, walked back to her room, leaving Andrew in the hallway, still in the silence, still learning to listen. The knock at the door came just before dinner, not loud, not urgent, but sharp enough that the boys froze mid-play and looked at each other. Andrew was in the study. Teresa was setting the table. The boys were lining up their toy cars by the window, and no one expected her. When Andrew opened the front door, his face tightened, just slightly. Mother. Eleanor Wright stood in her traveling coat, gloves still on, eyes scanning the foyer like it hadn't once belonged to her son. "Andrew," she replied. Her tone was neutral, polished, poised, as if her arrival wasn't a surprise at all. He stepped aside. She walked in slowly, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood. Her eyes moved over the furniture, the hall, the light. Nothing about the house pleased her. But she didn't say that. She didn't have to. Teresa stepped into the room, unsure. Her apron still on, her hands lightly dusted with flour. Eleanor turned. Their eyes met. "Mrs. Wright," Teresa said gently. Eleanor smiled, tight and cold. "You must be the maid," she replied. Her gaze drifted to the guitar resting near the couch. "And the singer." The air shifted, not violently, but enough that even the boys from the next room went quiet. Andrew stepped forward. "She's more than that." Eleanor's eyes flicked to him. "So I've read," she replied. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. The boys tried to fill the silence, but even they sensed the tension. Teresa served the meal. Eleanor offered grace before it, her voice calm, practiced, distant. Andrew kept his eyes on his plate. Teresa kept hers on the children. Halfway through the meal, Eleanor folded her napkin and spoke. "You know," she said, looking directly at Teresa, "Alyssa used to sing to the boys every night. It was sacred. Her voice, it was theirs." Teresa didn't flinch. "I believe it still is," she said softly. Eleanor tilted her head as if amused. "Then perhaps it shouldn't be borrowed." Andrew's fork hit the edge of his plate, louder than necessary. "Mother." But Teresa gently placed her hand on the table, not on his, just near it. "I didn't sing to take her place," she said. "I sang because they were crying in silence. And silence, when it grows too long, can feel like abandonment." Eleanor's eyes didn't soften. She was grieving too, but differently. Grief that had aged into tradition. Grief that wore pearls and folded napkins and spoke in implication. "You know nothing about Alyssa," she said. Teresa nodded. "You're right. I never met her. But I see her. In them." That night, Eleanor stayed in the guest room at the end of the hall. Teresa tucked the boys into bed without music. They asked for it, whispered the request, but she shook her head. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight, we let quiet speak." And they understood. Even at 5 years old, they understood. It was near midnight when Eleanor stepped out of her room. The house was dark, only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood. And then, a sound, low, soft, from the living room. Eleanor followed it, barefoot now, her silk robe barely making a sound. She stood just at the edge of the room. Teresa sat alone on the rug, guitar in her lap, eyes closed. The lullaby, barely audible, not performed, not played for anyone, just sung, like a whisper between her and God. Eleanor didn't enter. She stood there, hands folded, the shadows drawing gentle lines across her face. And for a moment, just a moment, her expression broke. Not fully, but enough to let grief breathe. Her eyes shimmered. Her jaw softened. Her fingers clenched, then released. And quietly, without a word, she turned and left the room. The next morning, Eleanor was gone, left before the boys woke. before the coffee brewed, before the house could ask her why. But she left behind something on the kitchen counter. A single photograph, Alyssa in the garden, laughing, a handwritten note beneath it. Her voice still matters, but let it live in more than memory. The sky was grey again, still, heavy with the kind of silence that doesn't fall from clouds, but from people. The photo, the whispers, Eleanor's visit. It had all settled into the walls of the Wright home like a storm that never really passed. And something in Teresa had changed. Not her kindness, not her care. She moved a little quieter now, took longer walks through the hallways when the boys weren't looking. And that afternoon, she opened the closet in the guest room and pulled out her suitcase. It was small, old, just enough room for someone who never planned to stay long. She laid it on the bed, opened it, began to fold. No music played, no humming, just the soft rhythm of fabric being laid flat, corner to corner. There was no anger in her, just release. Because sometimes, even love isn't enough to hold a space you were never meant to claim. Down the hall, the twins were building a blanket fort. They whispered under pillows and pulled flashlights from drawers. But when Jason got up to look for his bear, he passed by the guest room and stopped. The door was cracked open, and there, on the bed, was the suitcase, already half full. He stood there for a moment, staring, then turned and ran. "Brian," he whispered harshly. "She's leaving." They found her still folding clothes. Jason climbed onto the bed. Brian stood by the suitcase. "Why are you packing?" Jason asked. Teresa didn't look at them, not right away. "I think I've stayed long enough," she said softly. Brian's eyes welled up, his voice cracked. "You said you'd stay till we weren't scared anymore." Teresa froze. She turned slowly, kneeled down, met their eyes. "I didn't mean to break that promise," she whispered. "Then don't go," Jason said. His small hand reached out, gripping the edge of her sleeve. "I don't want to cause more trouble," she said. "You're not trouble," Brian said. "You're the only reason the house doesn't cry all the time." Those words, so simple, so small, hit her chest like a quiet blow. She pulled both boys into her arms, held them tight. "I'm not leaving because I want to," she said. "I'm leaving because sometimes the world outside doesn't understand what God is doing inside." Down the hall, Andrew had heard footsteps, whispers, and then silence. He walked toward the guest room, saw the boys clinging to her, saw the suitcase on the bed, saw the woman who had brought their home back to life, now trying to disappear from it. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice low. Teresa stood slowly. "I think it's time." Andrew didn't move. His jaw clenched, his breath shallowed. "You think leaving them again is the right choice," he said. His tone wasn't sharp, but it cut. "I've seen what happens when I stay too long," Teresa replied. "It always turns." "You're not too long. You're—" He stopped himself. She looked at him. "Andrew, I don't want to be another reason your family gets torn apart." The words sat there. He stepped forward, shoulders heavy. "And what if staying could be the reason it holds together?" Teresa shook her head. "I'm not their mother. No one asked you to be." Silence. Then Jason's voice, quiet and trembling. "But you're the only one who sings like she's still here." Andrew turned to the boys, kneeled beside them, let out a breath he'd been holding since the day Alyssa died. "She's not coming back," he said, "but maybe that doesn't mean we stop listening for her." Brian touched his hand. "Please don't let her leave." Andrew looked up at Teresa. "What does staying look like, if we do it differently?" he asked. "Not hiding, not pretending, just staying." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. After a moment, she spoke. "Maybe I move into the guest house. Maybe I'm not the only one who sings. Maybe the house learns how to hold more than one memory at a time." Andrew nodded. "Then let's start there." That evening, Teresa didn't sing. The boys sang, softly, together, off-key, but with courage. Teresa sat nearby, no guitar, just listening, and Andrew leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes glassy, still grieving, still healing, but not alone, and on the wall near the light switch Jason had taped a note. "We'll be quiet again if you leave. Please don't." The morning after Teresa almost left, the house didn't celebrate. It didn't erupt into laughter or applause. It simply breathed, a little slower, a little deeper. Like everyone had been holding something tight, and finally let go. The suitcase stayed under the bed. The guest house door opened, and the silence between Andrew and Teresa softened, not erased but gentled. The boys still hovered near her in the mornings, afraid it might all vanish again. Teresa never promised it wouldn't. She just showed up, cooked, listened, sang softly when no one was asking her to, and Andrew watched, quietly, from hallways, from thresholds, from within himself. Something had cracked open in him, not all at once, but like a shell loosening around something he hadn't dared to feel in years. The Right Foundation Gala came the following weekend, formal, lavish, photographed, an annual event Alyssa used to run with joy in her eyes and the twins on her hip. Now it felt like standing on a stage she'd built with his hands in his pockets. Andrew wasn't sure he was ready, but the world didn't wait for readiness. He stood in his closet, staring at suits. None of them fit the man he was becoming. They fit the man he had pretended to be. Eventually he picked the simplest one. No tie, just breath. He found Teresa by the front door. She wore a navy blue dress, modest, graceful, steady, just like her. He looked at her for a long moment. Then at the twins, fidgeting in their shoes. "You don't have to come," he said gently. "I know," she replied, "but I'm here." It was the same answer she gave to the boys, night after night. Not loud, not needy, just faithful. The ballroom was bright. Too bright, flashes of cameras, chatter rising like waves, people whispering names, watching faces, measuring everything with unspoken rulers. Andrew walked in with Teresa and the boys beside him. Heads turned, photos clicked. Some faces smiled, others tightened. He felt every step like a spotlight on their past. Teresa didn't flinch. The boys held her hands, and Andrew kept walking. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come quietly. It walks straight through fire and doesn't look back. Later, when the room quieted, Andrew was handed the microphone. He didn't use a script, didn't read from cards. He simply stood at the front of the room, looked out at the crowd, and then down at his sons, and began. "There's something strange about grief," he said. "It doesn't ask for permission. It just arrives, and if you're not careful, it stays." A hush moved through the audience. "I lost my wife 2 years ago," he continued, "and when I did, I didn't just lose her, I lost myself. I lost my home. I nearly lost my sons." He paused, looked toward Teresa. "But then, someone came into our lives. Not to fix what was broken, but to sit with us in the silence, to sing into it." Teresa's eyes lowered, just for a moment. She reminded us that love doesn't end when someone leaves. It echoes, through memory, through kindness, through music. He turned back to the crowd. "Tonight I want to announce a new wing of the Right Foundation, the LULLABY Project, a grief-informed childcare initiative, led by Teresa Walsh." The room was still, until the twins began clapping, a small, honest, proud, and slowly the others joined, not everyone, but enough. Teresa didn't stand. She didn't bow. She simply closed her eyes, held the boys' hands, and let the sound move through her. Back at home that night, she placed her heels by the guest house door. The boys were already asleep. Andrew stood outside, hands in his pockets, staring at the sky. He turned when he heard her steps. "You didn't have to say all that," she said. "I know," he replied. Silence. Then he looked at her, eyes softer than they'd ever been. "But I needed to." She nodded. "Thank you." Andrew exhaled. He wasn't sure what came next, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid to find out. The storm rolled in just after sunset. No warning, no slow build, just thunder that shook the walls, and lightning that lit the hallway like a flash of memory. Teresa was in the kitchen, closing cabinets. Andrew stood by the window, watching the trees bend in the wind. The twins had just finished brushing their teeth when the power went out. The house went still. Dark. Only the sound of rain and the boys' startled voices. "Daddy?" Jason's voice cracked. "I can't see." Andrew grabbed a flashlight and moved quickly down the hall. Brian was holding his brother's hand too tight. "I've got you," Andrew said, crouching. His voice was calm, present. Teresa appeared behind him, already lighting candles. Her face glowed in the flickering amber, steady, unshaken. That's when it happened. A wheeze, then a cough, then Jason's breath caught, sharp, tight, shallow. Andrew froze, but Teresa didn't. She dropped to her knees, her hands already reaching for the small emergency bag in the hallway closet. "Where's the nebulizer?" she asked. "Upstairs, top shelf in the linen closet," Andrew said, already moving. "Plug won't work. Power's out," she called after him. "I've got batteries," he yelled back. By the time he returned, Jason was in her lap, his eyes wide, his chest rising too fast. Teresa moved like someone who had done this before. No panic, no hesitation. She held Jason close, gently fitting the mask over his face, then flicked on the portable machine with a quiet hum. "Breathe with me, baby," she whispered. "Just follow my voice." Andrew crouched beside her, his hand on Jason's knee. Brian clung to his side. One breath, then another, each slower, each steadier. The storm kept raging, but inside that room, peace began to return. Later, the power came back. The lights flickered on, but no one moved. They sat together on the floor, wrapped in quilts. Jason tucked against Teresa's shoulder, sound asleep. Brian curled beside Andrew, holding one of his fingers. Silence, but not the empty kind, the kind that comes when everyone is too full to speak. Andrew looked at Teresa. "You knew exactly what to do," he said. "I've seen it before," she replied quietly. "My nephew, same condition." He nodded. And then, almost without meaning to, he whispered, "Thank you." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "You don't have to thank me for staying," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I've never said it." Later that night, as the boys slept, Brian slipped out of bed. He padded down the hall in his socks, a piece of paper and a marker in hand. Teresa found it in the morning, taped to the wall beside the thermostat, just above eye level. "We breathe together." 3 words, black marker, child's handwriting. She stood there in the hallway, hand pressed lightly to her chest. Andrew saw her standing still. He read the note, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Because they didn't need to. Some truths live in silence. Some forgivenesses are written with glue and tape and shaky letters. That evening, the twins sat in the garden again. The chameleons had held their color, even through the storm. A few petals floated in puddles, bright against the dark. Teresa sat nearby, not singing this time, just watching, just letting the peace settle. Andrew stepped out quietly. He carried 2 cups of tea, handed one to her. She took it with a small nod. They sat together, not quite touching. "I used to think healing came from doing something," he said, "working harder, reading the right books, saying the right words." "And now?" she asked. He watched the boys laugh, loud, open, no tightness in their breath, no fear in their eyes. "I think healing comes when someone decides not to leave," he said. She looked down, swallowed once, then said softly, "Sometimes staying is the hardest thing of all." Andrew nodded. "I'm glad you did." In the distance, thunder still echoed, faint now, like a storm remembering itself. But the house was still, not scared, not broken, just quiet in the way homes are when something sacred has passed through. 1 year later, the garden bloomed again. The chameleons Alyssa once planted had spread wider than before, brighter too, not because grief had left, but because time had made space for light to return. The boys were taller now, still wild, still full of questions, but their laughter sounded stronger, like it had roots. Andrew stood at the edge of the yard, watching them run between the petals. He held a small wooden frame in his hands, a gift Eleanor had left on her last visit. Inside it, a photo of Alyssa, laughing, sunlight caught in her curls. Beneath it, she had written, "She would have liked this. Messy, honest, and still full of life." Andrew smiled quietly. Grief didn't sting the way it used to. It rested now, beside the good. That afternoon, they held a small gathering in the garden. Nothing formal, just family, a few close friends, and a breeze that moved like a memory. Teresa stood at the back, hands folded. She didn't speak much, she didn't need to. The twins took turns placing handwritten notes inside Alyssa's old journal, the one that had lived on the desk for so long, unopened. Jason read his out loud. "I miss you, Mom, but now we know your song, and we sing it when the sky gets quiet." Brian didn't read his, but when Teresa peeked at it later, she saw 4 words. "We don't forget. We add." That night, the house glowed with soft light. Teresa now lived in the guest house, still close, still near, but the boundary had brought something good: clarity, respect, peace. The twins had made a sign for her door. Home. But next door. Andrew came by after dinner, 2 mugs in hand, tea for her, black coffee for him. They sat on the porch as the wind moved through the trees. "I didn't think we'd get here," he said quietly. "Neither did I," she replied. He looked out at the garden. "At first I thought letting go meant forgetting, that if I started to live again, I'd lose what she gave me. And now?" He turned toward her. "Now I know. Love isn't something you let go of. It's something you carry, and sometimes, if you're lucky, God gives you someone strong enough to help carry it with you." Teresa's eyes shimmered, not tears, just fullness. "I wasn't strong. You were present," he replied, "and that saved us." Later that evening, the twins curled up on the living room couch, blankets tangled around their legs. The guitar leaned gently against the wall, untouched tonight. Jason reached for it, plucked one string, then another. Brian hummed, not the full lullaby, just pieces of it. Andrew watched from the kitchen, didn't interrupt, because some things don't need to be finished to be whole. Above their bookshelf, a new frame hung where a clock used to be. Inside it, "We don't forget. We sing." Not as a rule, but as a rhythm, a reminder that this house, once heavy with silence, now breathed again, not perfectly, but honestly. As the night settled in, Teresa turned off the porch light. The stars blinked above the roof, and somewhere, just past memory and somewhere near Grace, a lullaby still lived, not in one voice, but in all of them. Not all homes are healed with time. Some are healed with presence, with someone who refuses to run, who stays. And when they do, God moves, not loudly, but deeply, in quiet songs, in quiet steps, in rooms once broken, and suddenly, everything begins again. If this story reached a tender place in you, if something in it felt like home, or reminded you that grief doesn't erase love, it deepens it, then we invite you to stay. At Elevated Heart Stories, we don't just tell stories, we hold space for the ones that heal, the ones that whisper truth and remind us that even in brokenness, God still breathes. So if you're walking through loss or learning how to live again after it, you're not alone here. Subscribe, share this story with someone who needs light, and let us know where you're watching from, because healing has no borders, and neither does hope. Until the next story, keep your heart soft, keep your ears open, and when the silence feels too loud, sing anyway. You're safe here, you're seen, and you are loved. This is Elevated Heart Stories, where stories rise, and so do we.